When the Game Boy Color launched at the end of 1998, one of the premier titles for the upgraded handheld was Link's Awakening DX, an updated version of the 1993 original with full color added to the game. But Nintendo was still in search of an original Legend of Zelda game made exclusively for the Game Boy Color. In 1999, Zelda creator Shigeru Miyamoto found the team he was looking for. This team, however, wasn't under Nintendo's umbrella of first or second party developers. It was a subsidiary within one of Nintendo's most loyal third-party publishers, and they were incredibly ambitious in what they wanted to do with the Legend of Zelda formula. The end result wasn't as glorious as they set out to make it, and it barely made it out in time before the release of a new, more powerful handheld. But the final releases are some of the most unique entries in the Legend of Zelda series, and served as the beginning to a new partnership between Nintendo and the game developer Flagship. This is the story of the Legend of Zelda, Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons. In 1997, Yoshiki Okamoto, a longtime producer at Capcom, resigned from his position within the company. Okamoto was one of Capcom's rising stars after serving as producer for their arcade mega hit Street Fighter II. But his ambitions went beyond the works of Capcom, and led him down the path of starting his own development studio. In April 1997, Okamoto founded Flagship, an independent game developer with funding from Capcom, Sega, and Nintendo. Flagship was founded on the concept of using the studio as a scenario and character engine, pumping out tales to go alongside the works of its benefactors. Much of the early work from the studio revolved around drafting stories for Capcom's upcoming releases in the Dino Crisis and Resident Evil series. In 1999, however, Okamoto had a chance to pitch something truly ambitious to Nintendo. He had drafted plans for 6 separate Legend of Zelda releases, all intended for Nintendo's shiny new Game Boy Color. The first of these would be a remake of the original Legend of Zelda on the NES. Okamoto theorized that for some gamers, they may have never been presented with the opportunity to play the first installment in the already prolific series. Another remake would follow, and then 4 original Zelda games. A new entry would drop every 4 to 5 months, saturating the handheld with more than enough adventures to play through. Okamoto and his team at Flagship began drafting different scenarios for the game. This was in stark contrast to the usual method of development for the series, which focused on core gameplay ideas before moving on to story elements. Within Flagship, Hadamaro Fujibashi, just in his late 20s, pulled together ideas from the Flagship staff and presented them to Shigeru Miyamoto at Nintendo. Fujibashi was fresh off his role as director of Magical Tetris Challenge, and over time became more involved with the Zelda projects. Within a few months, he had worked his way up to director of the games. On the Capcom side of things, Noritaka Funamizu oversaw the project as producer. He was a longtime veteran of Capcom, producing several hits for the developer during the PlayStation era. He had also worked alongside Fujibashi before, producing Magical Tetris Challenge. Complications in development quickly arose, however. What was supposed to be a quick and easy remake of the original Zelda was turning into a much bigger challenge. Notably, the team at Flagship struggled to line up the original Zelda map layout with the smaller Game Boy Color screen. The map had to be completely redesigned to fit up with the limitations of the Game Boy Color. The team made additional changes to the game as well, hoping to make the title less cryptic than its NES counterpart. Within Flagship, however, not everyone was on board with remaking the original Zelda to begin with, and the drawn-out process of the remake was only slowing down the team's ambitions. Okamoto approached Miyamoto with the problem, and the two came up with a new idea. Rather than remaking any titles, the team would move straight to creating original Zelda adventures, and instead of 4 original games, there would only be 3. The Triforce series, as it was pitched, opted to focus on different elements of the Zelda adventure, with each game bearing the title of one of the pieces of the Triforce. Later on, in the United States, these games were given the temporary names Mystical Seed of Power, Wisdom, and Courage. At Space World 1999, the first of these new titles was shown off. Mystical Seed of Power focused heavily on combat and featured a special rod that could change the seasons in the in-game world. News on Mystical Seed of Wisdom was also detailed, despite the game not being shown. This entry would focus more on solving puzzles, covering the second major gameplay element of the Zelda series. Progress on the titles began to slow as the team shifted to full development. Notably, the team had issues with interactions between the various releases. To incentivize picking up all the games in the series, the team at Flagship had developed ideas to connect the various releases to offer up new parts in each game. Likely inspired by the incredibly successful Pokemon games, the team first experimented with the Game Boy's link cable, but ran into issues regarding the amount of data the link cable could actually transfer. Instead, the team turned to a different tried and true method: passwords. But as development progressed, the Game Boy Color's life was already nearing its end, and by the middle of 2000, the games were nowhere near complete. Nintendo had already unveiled the Game Boy Advance, and it was set to release just a year later. The team at Flagship made one final change to their trio of titles. The third entry, The Mystical Seed of Courage, was cancelled, leaving only 2 games out of the original 6. In February 2001, the 7th and 8th entries in the Legend of Zelda series were released in Japan. The titles sold well, despite releasing only a month before the GBA in the region. Over 700,000 copies were sold across Japan. It was the 3rd best-selling Game Boy Color exclusive in Japan, only being beaten by the juggernauts of Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Critical impressions were solid, with Famitsu awarding the games a 31 and 30 out of 40. American fans didn't have to be too jealous, however. In advance of the title's release, the games were finally given localized names for North America. Mystical Seed of Power became the Oracle of Seasons, and Mystical Seed of Wisdom became the Oracle of Ages. A few months later, both games were released in North America on May 14th. Like in Japan, the titles managed to hit store shelves before the launch of the Game Boy Advance that came out just a month later. The staff at Flagship, however, hid a small surprise for anyone playing the game on the GBA. A secret ring shop was available only when the game was played on Nintendo's latest handheld, offering a small reward to the Nintendo diehards. Critically, the games were a huge hit in the States as well. Aside from issues with sound quality, every aspect of the games were praised, from Age's clever puzzles to Season's tough battles. IGN even awarded the game a perfect 10 out of 10, stating that the games were the best Game Boy Color games ever made. PAL territories would have to wait just a little longer, sadly, as the game didn't come out there until October 5th. By this point, the Game Boy Advance had already been out in the region, but international sales were still strong, likely due to the Game Boy Advance being backwards compatible with all previous Game Boy software. Each entry sold nearly 4 million copies on the Game Boy Color, a major commercial success. Both games followed a similar plot structure that saw Link making their way through a forest after hearing the call of the Triforce. In Oracle of Ages, Link encounters a singing woman named Nairu. In Oracle of Seasons, Link meets a dancer by the name of Din instead. In both games, these women are kidnapped. In Ages, the Sorceress of Shadows, Varen, takes control of Nairu and flees to a nearby town. Varen attempts to destroy the Maku tree, but Link travels back in time to stop her from doing so. In the past, Link must collect 8 time essences to put a stop to Varen. Seasons follows a similar structure, with the General of Darkness, Onyx, stealing away the titular Oracle with a black tornado. As the tornado cleared, the seasons were affected, causing the land to fall into seasonal chaos. Link again seeks the Maku tree, who informs our hero that they'll need 8 nature essences to restore balance and save the dancer Din. From a gameplay perspective, both games borrowed heavily from the previous Game Boy entry in the series, The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. The Oracle titles used the same engine and button layout as its predecessor, with the team at Flagship creating one of the best looking 8-bit worlds on the Game Boy. Returning elements from Link's Awakening included the 2D sections of dungeons, the shield using an item slot when in use, and items like the rock feather. Because of these design decisions, the Oracle games don't add many new core elements to the Legend of Zelda series. Each game did have their own feature, however. In Oracle of Seasons, Link obtains the Rod of Seasons, a magical item that allows them to change the season after stepping onto a tree stump and waving the wand. In Oracle of Ages, Link uses the Harp of Ages that allows them to travel to the past or the present. As a dual release, the way Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons interacted was rather unique. The game's password system allowed players to get new items upon unlocking codes in the game. When either game was finished, a password was presented to the player. Using this password in the other Oracle game would unlock new story elements and function as a sequel to the previous title. This included an extended ending featuring a boss battle with Ganon. These passwords could be exchanged from person to person, or players had the option of sending the data directly to a game cartridge using the Game Boy's link cable. The link cable was also used to trade in-game rings, once again harkening back to Pokemon. The Oracle games were a major hit, even with a lineup of powerful consoles releasing throughout 2001. In the coming years, Flagship would take over the handheld Zelda games and eventually expanded to contribute titles to the Kirby series as well. For game director Hidemaru Fujibasha, it was simply the beginning of his storied career with the franchise. Since its release, the Oracle games have only been re-released once. In the spring of 2013, both games were re-released on the 3DS's Virtual Console. Both games were sold for $5.99 each, and are still available for purchase on the eShop at the time of this video. And this is how I'm experiencing the games right now. For years, I've put off playing these two entries, and in the lead up to this video, I finally gave the games the time they deserve. They're the final mainline entries in the Zelda series that I haven't played. So far, I'm having a blast. I'm around halfway through Oracle of Seasons now, and I'm loving the chunky Gameboy graphics and the rock-solid level design. If it wasn't for Metroid Dread, I would have it finished by now. The Oracle games were some of the final first-party games for Nintendo's Game Boy line, and some of the finest as well. Several outlets over the years have praised the Oracle titles as some of the best games for the Game Boy Color. But within the Zelda fandom, I feel like a lot of people ignore these games due to their lack of availability. They're really fantastic titles in my opinion, and they still hold up well today. If you've never checked them out, give them a shot. Don't sit on them for years like I did. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and share this video on your favorite social media sites. In the comments below, let me know your thoughts on the Oracle games. Would you like to see them released for the Switch, or what about a full remake from Grezzo? Be sure to subscribe to catch the next video whenever it releases next week. In the next part, we're tackling Link's adventure across the high seas in one of my favorite games of all time, the GameCube classic, The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker.